I gave them everything, my son, my savings, my time. I gave them weekends of babysitting, loaned them money without asking when it would be paid back, and smiled even when I wasn't invited to birthdays or holidays. I gave my daughter-in-law the good china, the one my mother left me. I gave them the down payment on their first house when Patrick got laid off. And I gave them silence, so much silence, because I thought that's what good mothers do. But when they offered me that train ride, I said yes, not because I trusted them, but because some part of me still wanted to believe I mattered. I remember the first time Julianne called me Mom. It was right after she and Patrick got married, during that strange honeymoon glow when everything still felt fragile and hopeful. She hugged me that day and said, "You did such a good job raising him." I believed her. Maybe I needed to. I had raised Patrick alone. His father died when he was 10. Stroke, sudden and quiet, like someone just turned off the sound. After that, it was just me and Patrick, and the math never worked. Somehow the groceries got bought, the heat stayed on, and the school bills got paid, even when they shouldn't have. I worked as a bookkeeper for over 30 years at a local printing press. Nothing fancy, but I balanced every column down to the penny. I used to take pride in the little order I brought to the world. In the evenings, I'd make dinner, check Patrick's homework, and fall asleep to whatever show was playing in the background. It was a life. Not dramatic, not glamorous, but solid. And I thought that counted for something. When Patrick got into college, I cried in the parking lot after dropping him off. Not because I was worried, but because I was proud. I had done it. We had done it. I sold my wedding ring that year to cover the last tuition payment. He never knew. I didn't want him to. After college, he met Julianne. She was smart. So smart, calm, measured. The kind of woman who never raised her voice but could still take the air out of a room with just a glance. Patrick adored her. I tried. I really did. I cooked for them, brought over casserole dishes even when they didn't ask, and kept my visits short. I thought I was being helpful. When they bought their first house, Patrick said they were short on the down payment. I offered to help. $38,000 from my savings. It was everything I had set aside after retirement. Julianne insisted they'd pay it back, even drew up a little promissory note that I never signed. I told her it wasn't necessary. I trusted them. Silly me. Over the years, the calls came less, then the visits, then the holidays. My birthday passed with a polite text. When I dropped off a gift for their anniversary, I was told they weren't home. Their car was in the driveway. Still, I kept hoping for that shift, that gentle turn back towards something warm. So when Julianne called one Thursday morning, sounding unusually bright, I was caught off guard. "We want to take you on a little getaway," she said. "Just a short train ride through the countryside, something nostalgic and peaceful. You deserve it, Mom." I remember holding the phone tighter. I asked if Patrick would be coming too. She said, "Of course, he's the one who suggested it." I nearly cried. Not because I believed it, but because I wanted to believe it. Maybe that's the curse of mothers who give too much. We keep waiting for crumbs of affection, as if they're full-course meals. That night, Patrick texted, "Can't wait." That was it. No emoji, no "love you, Mom." But it was more than silence. I packed an overnight bag just in case. Brought my lavender scarf. Daniel gave it to me on our last trip before his stroke. I hadn't worn it in years. I also packed ginger candies, a notebook, and a pen. I told myself I might want to write something. I hadn't written in a long time. Maybe I hoped the words would come back on that train ride. Julianne picked me up the next morning. She wore a crisp white coat, her hair pulled back like she was going on national television. Patrick sat in the front seat, eyes fixed on his phone. He nodded when I said good morning. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered. The ride was quiet. I asked about work. Patrick said something vague about things being up and down. Julianne filled the silence with small talk. Recipes, weather, some TV show I didn't know. We drove through town, past the old library, and out toward the edge of Bangor. That's where the station was, or what was left of it. It was small. One wooden bench, a boarded-up ticket booth, and the track stretching out toward the trees. It didn't look like a place anyone visited by choice. But I smiled, held my bag a little tighter, and stepped out of the car when Julianne said, "We'll be right back. We need to talk to the ticket agent." Siam. She handed me a thermos of tea, kissed my cheek, and walked off with Patrick. I sat on the bench and waited. Looking back now, I see how I kept giving. My time, my savings, my trust. Because I thought they'd remember, that they'd see. But when people want to erase you, they don't argue. They just stop looking you in the eye. And sometimes a revenge story isn't about shouting or slamming doors. It starts with a silence you finally decide not to break. I sat on the bench for a while, watching the tracks shimmer in the sun. There weren't many people around, just a man in overalls reading a paperback, a young couple holding hands, and a toddler chasing her own shadow. It was peaceful in a strange, empty kind of way. I sipped the chamomile tea Julianne handed me, trying to ignore the metallic aftertaste. It wasn't bad, just off. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I glanced at the old clock above the boarded-up ticket window. Still no sign of them. I stood and looked around, walked a few steps in the direction they had gone. Nothing. No voices, no movement. Just the quiet creak of the trees and the soft groan of the platform under my shoes. I turned back to the bench, and that's when I saw it. A small note taped to the underside with clear Scotch tape, like someone had done it in a hurry. I pulled it off slowly. The paper was thin and slightly curled, like it had been folded and unfolded more than once. In neat handwriting it said, "If she still has her mind, she'll find her way back." I didn't react at first. I just stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. If she still has her mind. I read it again. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a cruel joke. It wasn't even a test. It was a message, a declaration. They didn't get pulled away. They weren't checking tickets. They had left me there, on purpose. I stood still for a moment longer, holding the note between my fingers. I didn't tear it, though part of me wanted to. I folded it carefully, like it was evidence, proof that what I had just experienced wasn't a hallucination. I was still lucid enough to know betrayal when I saw it. Their car was gone. I checked. No mistake, no misunderstanding. Just absence. And just like that, I became a problem they wanted to disappear. I walked back into the station, if you could even call it that. 2 benches, a faded corkboard with missing posters, and a few ads for handyman services, and a vending machine that blinked red. The station agent wasn't there. According to a handwritten sign, he was out for lunch. I sat for a while, then stood, then sat again. My knees buzzed. Not from walking, but from holding back the weight in my chest. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I had been left. And it's funny, isn't it? The world doesn't stop when someone walks away from you. The birds keep chirping. The sun keeps shining. The train still runs down the tracks like nothing happened. That might be the cruelest part. Eventually, I got up and walked. I followed the road out of the station. Gravel gave way to broken sidewalk, and the sidewalk turned to dirt. I passed rusted-out mailboxes, a barn with a sagging roof, and a tree that had grown sideways like it had given up trying to stand tall. My feet hurt after the first hour. By the second, I had stopped checking the time. I just needed to move, to keep from falling apart. Somewhere along that walk, I stopped feeling embarrassed and started feeling angry. Not loud, shaking your fist angry, but the kind that settles deep in your bones, the kind that remembers. It was near the edge of town where I found the old gas station. It looked abandoned, except for the lone pickup truck idling at the pump. A man got out, flannel shirt, gray beard, slow steps like his knees had stories of their own. He nodded at me, didn't ask questions, just saw me. "You from around here?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "I was left at the station." He paused, nodded again like he'd seen this kind of thing before. "You need a ride?" I didn't trust him fully, but I didn't have the energy not to. We didn't talk much on the way. He said his name was Harold. Used to work at the station years ago before they cut staff. The way he drove, slow, careful, like he knew every bump in the road, was oddly comforting. I let the silence sit between us like an old blanket, When we reached his place, a modest little home tucked behind bare oak trees, he offered me coffee and a sandwich. I took both. Not because I wasn't upset, but because I hadn't eaten since morning. He didn't pry. He just let me be. That night, I lay awake on the cot in the spare room. The smell of cedar, the ticking of an old clock, the wind slipping through the eaves. It all reminded me of a time when the world was quieter, kinder. When I believed my son loved me because he said he did. And now I wasn't sure if he even remembered the things I had done for him, the sacrifices, the long nights, the meals skipped to save for his science camp. That's what hurts the most, not the act of being left, but what it said. You don't matter enough to protect anymore. I don't know if you've ever felt that kind of silence from your own child, but if you have, I want you to know you're not alone. If this moment reminds you of anything you've lived through, share it. Sometimes just telling your story makes the weight a little easier to carry. I didn't cry that night. I just listened. To the wind, to my breath, to the memory of the note I folded and slipped into my purse. That piece of paper changed something in me. I didn't know it yet, but the old version of me, the one who kept giving without being seen, was already starting to fade. I would never be left like that again. Harold drove me home the next morning. Neither of us talked much. He had one of those old radios that only played country and weather updates, and I was grateful for the hum of it. Gentle voices talking about incoming snow and wind chill warnings. The world was still turning, even if mine had shifted. When we pulled up to my house, I hesitated for a moment. Everything looked normal. The porch light was still off like I always kept it. The mailbox still leaned a little to the left. The curtains were drawn just the way I left them, but something felt wrong, like I was returning to a place I didn't quite belong anymore. Harold handed me a slip of paper with his phone number. "Just in case you ever need someone to remember what really happened," he said. I nodded, thanked him, and stepped out. Inside, the house was too quiet, not peaceful, hollow. I walked slowly through the hallway, letting my fingers brush the walls, the same way I had 1,000 times. But that morning, the air felt thinner. The lavender diffuser I always kept near the entryway had gone cold. The scent I relied on to anchor myself, gone. Then I noticed the kitchen chairs. They weren't where I left them. Just a few inches off, but enough for someone like me to notice. I checked the rug under the table, slightly curled in one corner. I always smoothed it out, always. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom. The drawers looked untouched, but one, the one where I kept all my documents, was cracked open. I knelt down, pulled it fully open, and found my file folders stacked neatly, but wrong. They weren't in the order I'd left them. Some were turned upside down, some pages bent, some out of their labeled pockets. At first, I thought maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe I had been careless the last time I opened them. But no, I remember how I keep things. I remember the way I organized those folders with tabs and colored dots. Years of being a bookkeeper making me obsessed with order. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was intrusion. I checked the safe in the closet. It was locked, but when I ran my finger along the keyhole, I felt it. Scratches. Fresh. Someone had tried to open it. Maybe with a key that didn't quite fit. Maybe with a tool. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing for a long while. My hands were still. My breath slow. I wasn't panicking. I was processing. They had come here, while I was gone. While they left me sitting on a wooden bench at some backwoods station like a dog they didn't want anymore. They had come here and tried to open my life. My documents were untouched for years. My will, my power of attorney, my living trust, my deed. Now they were all out of order, some even copied and put back with slight errors, like someone was playing lawyer without knowing the script. It wasn't sloppy, but it wasn't invisible either. I walked to the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, then paused. It was already warm. I hadn't turned it on. I closed my eyes. Someone had been in my house that morning, or the night before, maybe while I slept at Harold's, maybe while I was still walking the cracked sidewalk back from that miserable train station. Either way, I had not imagined it. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't confusion. This was deliberate. And worse than the violation of space was the violation of memory. That quiet gaslighting that creeps into your mind. Did I really leave that drawer like that? Maybe I did. Maybe I am forgetting things. And that, I realized, was the real game. Make me doubt myself. Make me forget that I remember. The plan was never just about locking me out of my money. It was about creating a narrative, a slow erosion of credibility. So that when the papers were filed, so that when they said, Mom needs help managing her affairs, it would all sound reasonable. I turned off the kettle. I didn't want tea. I didn't want anything. I sat in my armchair by the window and stared at the maple tree in the yard. It had lost most of its leaves. The wind played with what remained, like hands undoing old threads. Julianne once told me that growing old was like becoming invisible. I think she meant it kindly, in that strange, poetic way she speaks when she's trying to seem profound. But now, I wonder if she said it as a plan, a preparation. Because if someone is invisible, it's easier to move them, easier to decide things for them, easier to take from them, property, choices, control, without guilt. I stayed in that chair until the sky darkened and the hallway shadows stretched long. The house felt unfamiliar, like a stranger had come in and rearranged something only I could feel. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my notebook, the one I brought on the trip, and flipped to a clean page. I wrote the date in the top corner. Then I began, not with stories, but with facts. Front porch light was off upon arrival. Kitchen chairs displaced, hallway drawer open. Legal folders disorganized. Scratches near keyhole of safe. Kettle warm, though not turned on. Each entry had its own line. No emotion, just truth, cold and clean. I tucked the notebook beneath a loose floorboard in the hallway, one only I knew about. Daniel and I used to hide birthday gifts there when Patrick was little. I smiled briefly, remembering that. Then I closed the board. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unraveling. They had crossed a line, and I had just taken my first step back across it. I woke up early the next morning, before the sun fully rose. The light in the kitchen was soft and gray, not quite morning, not quite night. I didn't make tea. I didn't eat. I just sat at the table in my bathrobe and listened to the refrigerator hum. It was strange how loud everything sounded now. Chairs creaking, pipes knocking gently, the faint wind outside pressing against the windows. For the first time, I saw the house not as mine, but as a place someone else had entered without asking. I opened the notebook I'd hidden under the loose hallway floorboard and reread what I had written the night before. I made a new entry. Mailbox undisturbed. Curtains exactly as left. Kitchen rug shifted left side. Julianne has spare key. Unknown if she used it. Door lock not damaged. No sign of forced entry. Then I wrote a sentence that took me a long time to put down. I am not confused. I am being manipulated. It felt like pressing a bruise, but it was also a kind of relief, like telling the truth out loud to yourself for the first time. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't drifting. This was strategic, calculated, and it wasn't just Julianne anymore. It was Patrick, too. That realization didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like a curtain being drawn back. All the signs were there. The brief messages, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he never followed up with real concern after the train station. He hadn't asked if I was okay. Not really. He hadn't been surprised that I made it back. Not even curious. It wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he knew what was supposed to happen, and I hadn't played my part. I walked into the guest bedroom and stood there for a minute. It was neat, untouched. But something about it felt cold, staged. That's where Julianne always insisted on helping me organize things. She'd say, "Let me help you with the bills, Mom. It's too much paperwork or, where do you keep your medical files? I'll put them in order." I used to think she was being kind. Now I knew she was preparing the story she would someday tell about how I was forgetful, disorganized, confused. But I wasn't confused. I was watching. I started checking the cabinets and drawers for any signs of cameras or trackers. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being thorough. Nothing turned up, but I left every drawer exactly how I found it. I didn't want them to know I knew. I took out a burner phone I had bought 6 months ago after Julianne suggested putting me on the family phone plan. I had nodded at the time, said thank you, then quietly bought my own prepaid flip phone at a gas station. Something about that suggestion hadn't sat right with me, and now I was grateful for that small, irrational moment of mistrust. I turned the phone on, set a new voicemail greeting, and saved just one contact, Martha R. She was a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, but we used to attend the same yoga class back when my knees still let me balance. She had been sharp then, a lawyer who handled estate planning and elder law. She once told me, people don't take things from you all at once. They do it gently while smiling. I wasn't ready to call her, not yet, but I wrote her name down in my notebook. I'd know when. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store. I didn't need much, just a reason to get out of the house. I bought oranges, peppermint tea, and a new pen. When I got home, I placed the receipt inside my notebook with the label, Daily Memory Record, purchased independently. I wasn't preparing to prove my sanity. I was documenting their plan to undermine it. Later that evening, Patrick called. His voice had that casual concern that always sounded a little too polished, like he'd practiced it before dialing. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you feeling?" "I'm good," I said simply. He asked if I needed anything. I told him I didn't. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he said, "Julianne mentioned you've been a little forgetful lately. She's worried, that's all." There it was, the planting of the seed, spoken gently, like concern, like love. I didn't argue. I just said, "She's kind to care." And that was it. But after I hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. It was such a small moment, but it shifted everything. Because now I understood something deeper. They weren't waiting for me to fall apart. They were building the case that I already had. That night, I wrote it down in the notebook. Patrick called tone. First verbal mention of forgetfulness. Phrase, Julianne's worried. My response, neutral. No panic, no confrontation. Then, I flipped back to the first page, reread every word I'd written so far, and whispered to myself, "You remember." I went to the kitchen, made a cup of peppermint tea, and stood by the window. The moon was pale and low. The maple tree didn't look fragile anymore. It looked like it was bracing itself for the winter. So was I. I stopped correcting them. That was the first thing I changed. When Julianne said, "You've been a little forgetful lately, haven't you?" I didn't defend myself. I didn't say, "No, I remember everything, including the drawer you left slightly open and the file you didn't put back right." I just smiled faintly and said, "Maybe." It took effort not to flinch when I said it, but I had made up my mind. I wouldn't try to prove anything to them anymore. Not now, not yet. I started letting cups rattle in my hands. Not too much. Just enough to make a sound when I carried them from the cabinet to the counter. When I folded towels, I let one slip to the floor and took a few extra seconds to pick it up. I asked questions I already knew the answers to, like what day it was or where I had placed my gloves. And Julianne noticed. Of course she did. That's what she was waiting for. "You've been leaving yourself little notes, haven't you?" she said one afternoon, after spotting a sticky note on the bathroom mirror that read, "Check stove before bed." I nodded. "I forget sometimes." She gave me that gentle, controlled smile of hers, the kind that never reached her eyes, and patted my shoulder like I was a child who'd said something cute, but sad. Then she pulled out her phone, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she took a picture of the note. Later that day, I opened my notebook and added, "Julianne noticed sticky note on mirror. Took photo. Did not ask questions, only observed." My response, passive. Tone of conversation. Careful, quiet. I made more notes like that. I started a section called Observed Reactions. Every time Julianne reacted to one of my slips, I wrote it down. Every time Patrick asked a suspicious question, like, "Do you remember the name of your doctor?" I noted the time, the phrasing, and my answer. I had turned myself into a character they could underestimate, and it worked. That Friday, Julianne brought me a gift, a planner. It was pale blue with gold edges and a little magnetic clasp. Inside were pages already filled in, appointments, reminders, and most notably a pamphlet tucked in the front pocket titled Support Services for Aging Adults. She handed it to me like it was a birthday card. "This might help," she said sweetly. "You've had so much on your mind lately. We just want to make things easier for you." I thanked her and turned the pages slowly, pretending to be touched. But inside, I felt nothing. Not sadness, not even anger, just confirmation. They weren't wondering if I was losing my mind. They were betting on it. That evening, while Julianne was still in the kitchen pretending to clean, I went into the guest bedroom and pulled out the old tape recorder I kept under the bed. It was dusty, the kind with the little plastic buttons and the tinny speaker. I inserted fresh batteries and tested it. It clicked to life like an old friend waking up from a long nap. I set it on a shelf behind a stack of magazines, aimed just slightly toward the kitchen. That's where Julianne liked to talk freely when she thought I was out of earshot. And she did. The next day, I played it back. Her voice was clear. "Brendan and I just want her to be safe. Once we file, it's only temporary. We'll keep it quiet." I stopped the tape, then played it again. "Once we file, it's only temporary." So that was it. The papers weren't coming. They had already been sent. I labeled the tape June Visit and slipped it into a small sewing tin, one Julianne had given me 2 Christmases ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I started writing longer entries in the notebook, not just facts, but patterns. How often they visited, what they asked, what rooms they looked in when I stepped away. I even tracked their glances, where they lingered, what drawers they eyed. I remembered when I used to want them to visit more. I used to long for Sunday dinners and laughter at the table. Now every visit was a silent interrogation wrapped in artificial kindness. I didn't flinch anymore. I let them talk. I let them plan. I let them believe they were winning. But I knew better. I called Harold one evening using the burner phone. He picked up after 2 rings and said, "Still breathing?" I told him yes. He said, "Good, that's a win some days." We met the next afternoon at the diner on Main. He ordered black coffee and a grilled cheese. I had soup. When I told him everything, about the note, the visits, the tape, he didn't interrupt, just listened, like he had all the time in the world. When I slid the tape across the table to him, he tucked it into his coat pocket without a word. "I've got a lockbox at home," and he said, "Same one I used to keep my wife's birth certificate in. I'll put this there." I nodded. "There's more coming." I figured. That night I slept better. Not because I felt safe, but because I knew I wasn't pretending anymore. I had made the shift from someone being watched to someone watching. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a plan. Not a loud one, not a violent one, but a plan rooted in something stronger than panic. Clarity. I poured myself a cup of tea, opened the planner Julianne had given me, and flipped through the pages filled with appointments she had penciled in. Then I tore one out, crumpled it quietly, and threw it in the trash. I already had my own calendar, and I was the only one who knew what was really written on it. Julianne stopped by the next evening. She brought banana bread, still warm from the oven, and wore that soft pink sweater she always put on when she wanted to appear extra gentle. She smiled as she stepped inside, set the bread on the counter, and said, "I missed our chats." So did I, or at least I used to. We sat at the kitchen table. I made tea, her favorite, chamomile with a splash of honey, and brought out the porcelain cups I hadn't used in years, the ones Daniel bought on our 25th anniversary. She complimented them like it was the first time she'd seen them. Maybe it was. We talked about nothing in particular. A neighbor's tree that had fallen during last week's storm, one of her students who had brought her a handmade card. She was doing what she always did, disarming with small talk, but I wasn't in the mood to be charmed. "I've started tracking a few things for you," she said after a pause, her fingers gently brushing the rim of her teacup. "Just the basics. Doctor's appointments, renewals. Brendan and I were thinking we might help more regularly now, help with managing things. I nodded slowly. That sounds important. Her eyes flickered. Not surprise, but satisfaction, the kind that comes when a plan is working. Then, as if it were nothing, she said, "We've already started filing for temporary guardianship, just until things settle. It's what's best for you." My heart didn't race. I had rehearsed this moment. I dabbed my nose with a tissue, gave her the softest smile I could manage, and said, "I trust you." She reached across the table and patted my hand. Later that night, after she left, I retrieved the recorder hidden under the cushion of the armchair she always sat in. Her voice was crystal clear. "We've already started filing." I labeled the recording, backed it up to a USB drive, and tucked it away in the same tin where I kept the others. I sat for a long time at the table, not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I wanted to feel the stillness, the moment when pretense ended. The line had been crossed. They were no longer pretending to help. They had made it official. They were going to try to take me. That night, I made a new entry in my notebook. Julianne visit, tone, gentle. Direct confirmation, guardianship, filing underway. My response, passive acceptance. Recorder placed under armchair prior to visit. Audio captured clearly. I stared at the last line and exhaled slowly. I hadn't felt this steady in years. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in over 5 years. I picked up the phone and called Martha Reeds. She picked up on the second ring, and her voice was exactly as I remembered. Steady, clipped, all business. "It's Helen Warfield," I said, "from yoga." "You probably don't remember." "I do," she interrupted. "Tree pose. You fell, blamed the draft." We both laughed. It felt good to laugh. But when I told her what had been happening, her tone changed. The warmth remained, but the words got sharper. "Do you have documentation?" "I do," I said. "Audio, notes, witness." "Good," she said, "and do not confront them. We'll start with a freeze." A freeze. That was the word that shifted everything. Not revenge, not drama, just silence, backed by law. The next day, I met Harold at the diner again. He didn't ask for updates. He simply pushed his plate aside and said, "Need me to keep something?" I handed him the USB drive, the notebook, and a sealed envelope with my most recent will. He placed them in his coat pocket, poured more coffee, and talked about how the forecast called for snow. There was no drama, no dramatic declarations, just two people moving pieces into place. That night, I slept through the entire night for the first time in weeks. And if you've ever had that moment where someone you once trusted tries to quietly erase you, but you decide calmly not to let them, then maybe you understand what I felt. Maybe you've been there too. If any part of this reminds you of something you've lived through, I hope you'll share it. Not for them, but for you, for others like us. Sometimes it helps to know we're not the only ones who've been made to feel invisible. You're not alone. You never were. The next morning, I folded the letter Julianne had given me weeks ago about available services and tucked it into the drawer under the sink. I placed a note on top. Reviewed. Declined. Then I brewed tea, sat in my usual chair, and waited. Because now I wasn't scared of what they would do. I was watching what they would do next. Brendan showed up just after lunch the following Tuesday, unannounced. I had just finished watering the porch ferns when I saw his car pulling into the gravel driveway. I paused with the watering can in hand, watching him step out, neatly dressed in a pale blue polo and pressed slacks, holding a small paper bag from the bakery I used to love. He smiled, that familiar, tight-lipped kind of smile that once meant something. Not anymore. "Thought I'd stop by," he said. "Brought your favorite, those lemon scones." I nodded, stepped aside, and let him in. We walked into the sunroom, the one Daniel had built back when we thought we'd grow old together in this house. Brendan looked around like a guest, even though he had once laid on this very carpet as a child, building Lego castles and eating popsicles. "How's Harold?" he asked, casual. "He's good," I said, keeping my voice light. The small talk didn't last long. Brendan sat forward, elbows on knees, and looked at me with a mix of concern and calculation. "Mom, I need to ask something," he began. "Have you been feeling forgetful lately?" I tilted my head slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Julianne mentioned you misplaced your keys and there was that tea kettle. You forgot it was on." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I found the keys. They were in the coat pocket. As for the kettle, I turned it off." He nodded, like he was logging the answers away. Then, as if the topic were casual, he said, "Do you remember your online banking passcode?" I paused, letting the silence sit just a beat longer than necessary. "I think I wrote it down somewhere," I replied. "Can't recall it off the top of my head." He seemed to relax a little. The corners of his mouth curved. Not a smile, not quite, but enough. Brendan changed the subject again, asked about the neighbor's dog, the azaleas in the back garden. Then he gently brought up a conversation he and Julianne had been having, with someone at the bank. "Just making sure things are in order," he said. "You know, in case anything ever happens." There it was. He used the phrase "in your best interest," like a lawyer might, like someone trying to soften a blow before it landed. And I realized in that moment that my son, the boy I raised, the man I believed would protect me, was no longer confused. He was complicit. Not just going along with Julianne, not just worried. He was active now, intentional. After he left, I didn't cry. I sat in the kitchen, the scone untouched, and let the silence wrap around me. I thought of the boy who once held my hand when crossing the street, the teenager who used to come home late but always kissed my cheek goodnight, the man who now asked about passwords as if it were small talk. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt erased. Slowly, day by day, gesture by gesture, he had moved me out of the frame. The way one might shift furniture in a room until a space no longer feels like home, until you don't quite notice what's missing, until someone can say, "We just want to help," and pretend they don't see what they're doing. That night, I texted Martha from Harold's phone. "We need to accelerate the timeline. Brendan has stopped hesitating. Now he's moving forward," she replied within 5 minutes. "Understood. The court date can be moved up. You'll need to stay quiet a bit longer. Keep the performance. Let them believe what they want to believe." I stared at her message for a moment, then powered the phone off and placed it back in the drawer. I was tired, but not defeated, because I had seen enough now. I had seen the way they paused outside my study. I had heard the change in tone. I had read the carefully worded planner Julianne gave me, with its reminders and resources. I had watched Brendan avoid my eyes when I asked about his job security, and maybe most of all, I had felt the quiet shrinking of space. My space, my choices, my name. That was the moment I understood. They weren't going to steal my home or my money. They were going to steal me, and they would do it with soft words and good intentions, with banana bread and lemon scones, with concern and care and gentle guidance, until I became a story they told themselves at night to feel better about what they did, but not this time. I reached under the loose board in the hallway and pulled out the notebook. I added new entries. Brendan visit, asked about memory, mentioned passcode, reference, meeting at bank, body language, cautious but practiced. Conclusion, he is no longer unaware. He is involved. I underlined the last sentence 3 times. Then I lit a candle in the kitchen, sat down with my cup of tea, and watched the wax melt slow and steady. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. It's strategy. And in that silence, I had started to write a revenge story. One not about anger, but about reclaiming what they thought I'd forgotten. My mind, my voice, my power. Julianne came over that Friday afternoon. She brought banana bread, still warm in a wax paper wrap, and wore the same peach cardigan she often wore when she wanted to appear soft, maternal even. She smiled at the door like everything was as it should be, like she hadn't abandoned me at a train station weeks earlier. "I thought we could have tea," she said, stepping in before I even answered. I nodded and led her to the kitchen. I had already set the table. Chamomile with a hint of lavender, her favorite. The good china. Everything looked so normal, it hurt. We sat across from each other. I let her talk. She filled the room with teacher voice stories about her students, how one of them brought her a rock shaped like a heart. She spoke of Brendan's work stress, the neighbor's noisy dog, the garden. All surface, all deflection. Then she placed a planner on the table, slid it toward me like an offering. "I've started tracking a few things for you," she said casually. "Doctors, refills, little appointments. Brendan and I thought it might help keep things clear." I ran my fingers over the leather cover. Smooth, expensive. A gift disguised as surveillance. I said thank you. She nodded, eyes not quite meeting mine. Then she added, almost like a whisper, "We've already started filing for temporary guardianship, just until things settle." I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this. I reached for a tissue, dabbed at a dry eye. "That sounds important," I said. Her hand touched mine, warm, firm. "It's just a safety net. We love you." I smiled the kind of smile you wear at funerals. After she left, I went straight to the guest room and retrieved the small recorder I'd hidden beneath the cushion of the armchair she sat in. I played it back. Her voice, calm and sweet. "We've already started filing for temporary guardianship." Like it was nothing. Like she was reading off a grocery list. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the recorder, the notebook, and the burner phone. I typed a single message to Martha. She said it, it's on tape. She responded within minutes. "Good. That's our trigger. Start preparing now. Don't confront. Stay calm." I powered off the phone and slid it back into the coffee tin where I kept my matches. The same tin Julianne gave me 2 Christmases ago. Ironic, isn't it? That the same woman who once embroidered my name on a tea towel now whispered legal plans into my living room. That the same hands that served me soup now reached for my name, my future, my autonomy. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the refrigerator hum, the wind tapping at the window like a patient warning. My fingers clenched around the corner of my blanket, not from fear, from clarity. They didn't think I was weak. They were hoping I was. Saturday morning, I woke before sunrise. I made oatmeal, sat in the armchair by the window, and reviewed my notes. Every date, every phrase, every offhand comment Julianne or Brendan had made. All of it. Patterns emerged. Each, "We just want to help." Each, "Just in case." Each, "For your safety." The language of takeover cloaked in tenderness. At noon, I met Harold at the local diner. He was waiting in the back booth, sipping coffee like he'd never left that town in his bones. "You ready?" he asked, eyes kind but sharp. I handed him a sealed manila envelope. Inside, the USB with the recordings, a printed copy of my will, and the most recent entries from my notebook. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and slid it into his coat. "It's locked up by tonight," he said. "Nobody touches it but me." We talked about nothing after that. Weather. How the leaves were late this year. His sister's cat. Not once did we mention Julian or Brendan or the bank, but we both knew what we were building, a wall they wouldn't see coming. The next day, I met Martha at the legal center. The air smelled of old paper and purpose. She wore that gray blazer again, no perfume, just the scent of someone who knew how to fight quietly. We sat in a back room, blinds drawn, table cleared. "I'm filing a preemptive injunction," she said. "This will freeze all motions related to guardianship or estate change. It's not loud, not accusatory, just legal steel between you and them." I signed the form. Her hand lingered on mine. "You've got this." When I left the office, I didn't feel brave. I felt anchored. Back at Harold's house, I unpacked slowly, placed my notebook inside the drawer beside the bed, folded my scarf, lit a candle, poured tea. Then I sat by the window and watched the sky darken without dread. They had written a script for me, a quiet fade into confusion, into submission. But I had just rewritten the ending. Brendan showed up unannounced on Tuesday afternoon. I was watering the porch ferns when I heard the tires crunching down the gravel. I didn't rush to the door. I let him wait while I finished misting the leaves, wiped my hands on a towel, and moved as if I hadn't been anticipating this moment for days. He stood there holding a brown paper bag, pastries from that overpriced bakery downtown, the kind he used to bring when he forgot birthdays. "Thought I'd stop by," he said. "Brought you the lemon tart you like." I stepped aside to let him in. "How thoughtful," I said, like it meant nothing. We sat in the sunroom. The light was soft there, filtered through old lace curtains. He took the seat across from me, adjusted a throw pillow, like he needed to settle into some role he hadn't rehearsed enough. We chatted, weather, the neighbor's dog, his job. He mentioned Kayla was swamped with her end-of-semester grading. I just nodded, sipped my tea. Then his voice shifted. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and said, "Have you been feeling forgetful lately, Mom?" There it was, the opening move. "I misplaced my keys last week," I said casually, "but I found them in the fridge. Strange how life gets noisy sometimes." He chuckled, but his eyes flicked past me toward the hallway. Calculating. I recognized that look now. "She worries about you," he said. "That's all. Maybe it's time we simplify some things." I tilted my head. "Simplify?" He cleared his throat. "Like your bank accounts, your will, your medical directives, just so that if anything happened, we'd be ready. For your sake." The phrasing was clean, gentle, practiced. I didn't respond right away. I wanted the silence to stretch, let him sit in it. "Brendan," I said finally, "do you remember who made your school lunches every day until you were 12? He blinked. "You did." "And who drove you to debate tournaments across 2 states? He nodded slowly. "You." I set my teacup down. "And do you think the person who did all that suddenly can't remember how to turn off the stove?" He didn't answer, just looked away. That was the moment I knew. He was no longer unsure. He was no longer just following Kayla. He had joined her. He had crossed over. He stood to leave not long after. Said he'd be in touch. I didn't walk him to the door. Instead, I sat in the sunroom long after his car left the driveway. I stared out the window at the hydrangeas I planted the year after Daniel died. They were just beginning to bloom, soft blue, full of promise. But I didn't feel peace. I felt distance, a clean break from the illusion I had clung to, that Brendan was being pressured, that he was innocent, that illusion had withered. That evening, I texted Martha from Harold's flip phone. "He's in it now. Not confused. Complicit. We need to accelerate." She replied immediately, "We'll adjust. Be ready to move within the week." I packed before I went to bed. Just the essentials. My notebooks, my IDs, the burner phone, the latest audio file. I didn't take photos. I didn't take heirlooms. This was not a goodbye. This was a redirection. The next morning, Harold picked me up before sunrise. We didn't speak much. He handed me a thermos of coffee and a brown paper sack with a peanut butter sandwich inside. We drove north, past the edges of town where the roads narrowed and the fields opened up wide. His sister had an old house near the reservoir. She'd left it to Harold in her will, but he'd never lived there. Just kept it clean, in case someone ever needed it, he once said. It was mine now. Quiet, unlisted, safe. We unloaded my things. I made the bed, opened the windows, lit a candle. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't wait for a knock on the door. I didn't jump at the sound of tires. I simply sat. I wrote in my notebook. They think I'm still within their reach. Let them think it. I'm already gone. Dear listener, if any part of this story reminds you of someone watching you with false concern, of words sugar-coated with control, then I want you to know you're not alone. We don't always get a courtroom victory or a family apology. But sometimes the most powerful revenge story is the one told quietly, step by step, in full awareness. If you've been through something like this, or are going through it now, leave me a comment. Just a small word. I'm listening. And I remember too. The morning I left, I didn't pack much. Just one bag with what I needed. The thumb drive, my birth certificate, a clean notebook, the court papers Martha helped prepare, and the last photo of Daniel and me in the garden. I didn't take the family china. I didn't take Brendan's childhood drawings. I didn't take the scarf Kayla once complimented just to ask if she could have it. The house wasn't mine anymore, not because of legal papers, but because of something deeper. Love doesn't leave notes under train station benches. It doesn't spy. It doesn't erase you while smiling to your face. Harold waited outside in his truck, engine running low and steady. He helped me load the bag without asking questions. The sky was still dark, but the air had shifted. You know that kind of stillness before a storm? That's what it felt like. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived through louder storms. Before I stepped into the truck, I walked back up to the porch. I slipped an envelope under the front door. It didn't need a stamp. It wasn't going anywhere but into the heart of what they had broken. Inside the envelope were 3 things. First, a printed transcript of Kayla's voice, calm, deliberate, discussing guardianship as if it were a weekend chore. Second, a letter in my handwriting. No anger, no apology, just this. The moment you decided I couldn't make decisions, I made one. And the third, a torn page from my old yoga journal, a quote I had underlined years ago. When they believe you're weak, they forget you still remember. Harold and I drove away in silence. We didn't look back. The place I went wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, clean, mine. A friend of Harold's had offered it after hearing my story in passing. She had said, "Sometimes women like us don't need rescue. We need a place to finish our sentence." I understood what she meant. Not run, not hide, but finish. I spent the next few days writing in my notebook. The same kind of short, clean entries. Call with Martha confirmed. Accounts frozen. Mail redirected. There was no chaos, no revenge, just correction. Brendan and Kayla would figure it out eventually. They'd go to the bank, they'd make the calls, they'd find the locks changed, both literal and otherwise. But I wouldn't be there to explain it. And that was the point. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been treated like a shadow in a home you built with your own hands? If you've ever felt that, you already understand this part of my story. You understand why silence, when chosen, can be the loudest answer of all. They thought they were walking into a bank to finalize what they believed was already theirs. Brendan wore his navy blazer, the one he used for weddings, interviews, and now, apparently, coercion. Kayla came with a leather folder in hand, her hair tied back, her smile practiced to just the right degree of concern. They had made an appointment under my name. The plan was rehearsed. Brendan would speak softly, say I'd been forgetful, perhaps depressed. Kayla would present a letter, unsigned by me, of course, suggesting temporary guardianship for my own protection. All of it designed to sound like care. But it wasn't care. It was control, dressed in Sunday best. What they didn't know, what they never expected, was that 3 days earlier, Martha had already sent a legal injunction. The bank manager knew my name, knew my case, knew to say nothing other than, "We've received legal instruction. Nothing can proceed without her in-person authorization." That's when Kayla's smile began to falter. She leaned in, she tried charm, she tried concern, she even hinted that I was in denial. But the manager was firm, calm, unmoving. The account was sealed, all movement blocked. Their script was useless now. Brendan stayed quiet, jaw tight, eyes flickering with something between confusion and embarrassment. He muttered, "There's been a misunderstanding." But deep down, I think he knew, not just that they'd failed, but that I had seen them coming. Security was called when Kayla refused to leave. She raised her voice. Not a scream, just loud enough for other ears to catch a glimpse of the truth hiding beneath the politeness. Her words weren't angry, they were desperate. Back at Harold's place, I sat by the window, the same one that overlooked the garden with the crooked fence and the lonely bench. I held my cup of tea steady, and when Martha texted me, "They tried. It's done. You're safe." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Martha, not even to Harold, just to myself. I wasn't safe because someone saved me. I was safe because I stopped waiting to be saved. The woman they thought they could quietly erase had been writing her own chapters all along, and now theirs had just come to an end. I moved into the little house by the sea in early spring when the air still tasted of snow and salt. The place looked forgotten, a single story with faded curtains and a porch that creaked underfoot. I unpacked slowly, my teacups, the notebooks filled with every detail of their betrayal and a framed photo of Daniel smiling behind me. Then I opened the windows and let the breeze carry away any lingering doubt. I didn't tell Brendan or Kayla where I'd gone. They still think I'm somewhere nearby, waiting. In reality, I've never felt farther from their reach. Every morning, I light a candle scented with lavender and chamomile, sit at my desk and write in the pages I've labeled New Beginnings. I plant flowers along the fence, a small gesture of life thriving where others thought it would wither. Martha called to say the injunction is permanent. All attempts to access my accounts, change my will, or petition for guardianship are barred by law. I thanked her, but what moved me most was knowing I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I was recognized at last, silently, by justice itself. With the money safely redirected into a small foundation, I fund local programs for women over 60 who've been manipulated, overlooked, or financially isolated by their families. It's quiet work, grants for legal advice, art therapy classes, even simple coffee mornings at the community center. I don't seek headlines. I just want them to know they're not alone. That dignity isn't a commodity to be stolen, but a right to be reclaimed. On Sundays, I lead gentle breathing sessions for 2 neighbors who remind me of myself at 50. We sit in a circle, candles flickering, and share stories. None of us shouting, all of us heard. Sometimes I teach them my favorite yoga pose, balancing on one leg, arms outstretched, reminding them that strength often comes from steadiness, not force. I don't miss the old house. I don't miss waiting for a call that never came. Instead, I wake each day to the sound of waves and the memory of a note taped under a train station bench. If she still has her mind, she'll find her way back. I did more than find my way. I built a new one. If you've ever felt unseen or silenced by someone you loved, I'd love to hear from you. Share your story in the comments below, and let's remind each other that quiet victories can be the most powerful of all.